welcome back. This is Data Centre Live London. Let's move on to our next keynote, where we are talking generative artificial intelligence and Latin American data centres. Our guest is Michael Ortiz, Chief Executive Officer at Layer 9 Data Centres. Hi Michael, how are you?
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. As we say in the virtual studio, the virtual floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, and Layer 9 is deeply appreciative of the time given to us. I think the topic today we're going to discuss is about generative AI. There's a lot of chat about that, no pun intended, and how that's going to influence not only how data centers are operated, how they're built, and moreover, how they're going to impact emerging markets such as Latin America. Great. Okay. Well, I'll kick off. By any means, if you have any questions, interrupt, jump in, let me know if there's any of the topic discussions that you want to lead off with. But let's deal with the elephant in the room, right? Open AI. It's an application that has grown faster than any other application in the history of applications. We are now north of 1 billion users for an application that's just recently been launched within the last 6 months. It has brought on great excitement and along with it equally mirrored concerns, right? And I think one of the biggest concerns are, how do we govern this thing? I think that most people agree that this is going to evolutionize and change the way we access data, moreover, how we end up connecting each other with data, and how we use this information to better society. I think a philosophical question that comes at times is this more bad than good? And I think the debate is still out. Most recently, Sam Altman, CEO of ChatGPT, most recently spoke to the United States Congress, and that he stated that for what it's worth, right, AI has solidified the notion that data centers are in fact now the sky which houses the cloud, right? And the reality is, his quote was, if this technology goes wrong, it could go wrong, quite wrong. And I would agree with that, that if not governed and if not maintained with the compliance set that is unanimous throughout countries and regions, this could literally become viral. And for what it's worth, it can become a matter of non-controlling the unknown, if you will, because many of these open AI networks and platforms have announced that while they have announced the release of their ChatGPTs, GPT-3s, and derivatives, for example, AWS has an AI model called Titan tied to Bedrock. They still don't know and understand the complete complexities of this machine and the application. So it is an immense amount of unknown, but the things that can become generative and positive are immensely visible. I would like to say that AI and ChatGPT and all these derivative forms are an equalizer. It democratizes data. It allows people in emerging markets, people who otherwise wouldn't have access to things like medical advice, legal advice, accounting, have now a portal to be able to source data and be able to educate themselves on how to properly present, whether it be trying to understand why my daughter has cancer, or what treatments are available for her, or as opposed to how do I start a business, right? If I have no seed capital, it's going to greatly enable and democratize emerging markets, which is why we're so excited about markets like Latin America, because for us, we see the frontier just beginning to emerge, where there's 650 million residents who have access to the internet but aren't using it the way first world nations are using it. While they may be having access to smartphones, their use of data relative to smart devices, relative to Internet of Things has just begun. Their usage, their penetration rate in these specific verticals is sub 10%. So for us, we see an immense opportunity for AI to grow into these regions. And moreover, it's going to have a direct impact on how data centers are built. So I thought I'd take a pause and see if there's anything that you wanted to specifically cover for us to hit up on.
No, I'd continue as you are. We're getting into the weeds of it there, so I'd let you continue. We'll get to the questions at the end, if that's okay.
Okay. Well, I don't want to belabor too much of this call with our pitch, but moreover, make it as interactive as possible. You know, one thing that we really like about Latin America is that its proximity to the United States, that it's an interconnected region of the world that touches all of the continents. And as I mentioned earlier, 650 million users, right? And we're talking about penetration rates that on social media average between 75 and 85%. And again, I go back to the notion that, for example, in Mexico, there's 128 million residents, right? But here the penetration rate for social media is at 73%. Now that's not low. However, we look at things in terms of how these same 128 million residents connect to fintech, connect to banks, connect to hospitals. Those numbers are still in the low 20%. There's an opportunity here of immense growth. And for example, you look at also the demographics of a country like Mexico, where you see the makeup of the population is immensely younger than that of Europe and the United States. 70% of Mexico's 128 million residents are below the age of 44 years old. And if you break that down further, 56% are below 34 years old, 41% are below 24. So an immensely emerging new population of users who, quite frankly, at 24 years old and lower, have been born into the internet from the inception. They know nothing else but the internet. You and I used to go to libraries and do research papers and have to, look through Rolodexes of information. Now the internet is that Library of Congress. And moreover, when we think about markets like South America, a vast majority of these residents that constitute 650 million live in urbanized centers. Mexico is an example of that. 81% of the population lives within 100 miles of a major metropolitan market. So for us, we see an immense opportunity to service not only what is a growing trend towards edge computing, right? Gaming, streaming, all that are all candidates for edge computing. AI is a candidate for edge computing. But also all this information that's aggregated can't sit at the edge. There's just not enough cores to process and store that data. And as a result, we have to have a both centralized and an edge compute offering in Latin America. And it's not a surprise to see how the cloud has grown into all these regions, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Argentina, and Mexico, in great, great form. The amount of compute that's coming into these countries is massive. We're talking about compounded growth that is now near the top of its class relative to the emerging markets, growing at a compound clip of nearly 23%. And that makes sense because if you think about Mexico, for example, getting back to Mexico, the average user in Mexico in 2002 was 9.8 gigabytes. 2022 was 9.8 gigabytes. That number is going to grow to almost 28 gigabytes per user, which means here the growth matches the growth that we're seeing relative to compute. It matches up well, which means there's going to be plenty of room for operators like ourselves to provide solutions to the cloud. And as was stated earlier, I like that notion that data centers are in fact the sky that supports the cloud, right? And the reality is that there's not enough data centers to support what's coming down the road. But we also have to be very conscious, right, of not only the effects of this AI, but also the environmental impact that we have building these data centers. We need to get smarter. We need to be more efficient. We need to be building greener. We need to be building with scale in mind, but at the same time, not get notional that it's an unlimited ramp, right? There is an impact to bringing on these data centers. There is a carbon impact that now is becoming front and center. We have to be very keen on little things like how we build our data centers, building them with derivative materials. How do we cool these data centers? How do we more efficiently power these data centers up so we're not stranding power? Power is a big deal. In Mexico specific, in the region of Querétaro, which is the kind of the Silicon Valley or the Virginia hub of data centers, this cluster, this little state, which is one of the 7 states of the Bajío region, is now front and center. The cloud is dropping flags throughout this entire region here in the states of Guanajuato, which we're located. So for us, AI, edge computing, streaming, gaming, a young workforce is really leading itself to a market that we see really almost limitless potential. And I would like to say that I'm a pathologically optimistic person about LATAM because I've been drinking my own Kool-Aid, but the tea leaves are reading very clear. Growth has just begun in these regions. The game has just started. And if we're to think about this like a football game of 90 minutes, Europe may be in its 65th minute. The United States may be in its 70th minute. I would tell you that in Latin America, I would put this as the lights just came on and the players just walked onto the field. And that is something that not only excites us, but it excites the cloud because the cloud is growing here in great numbers. So I thought I'd pause there.
Well, I love that analogy of the football game. That's fantastic. That's such a good way of looking at it. But let's just wind back a little bit for people who are maybe looking at opportunities in Latin America, another emerging market. But if we stick with Latin America, how can data center professionals try and navigate some of the specific regulatory challenges or opportunities there?
I would tell you that in any market, whether it's Latin America or North America or Europe, the challenges are all baselined in the same 4 core pillars of you have to get through these gates. One, you have to be developing data centers that are well interconnected and have robust infrastructure. And that would include fiber, power. In some instances, you need resources like talent. Talent is a resource that has a scarcity that is not only affecting Latin America, but it's affecting parts of Europe and parts of Asia and Americas. Access to talented workforces are becoming a bigger challenge than we think, because the workforce that we have today is a relatively older workforce. For example, in the United States, the average IT professional is in his mid-40s. If you walked into a Miami convention, right, for Bitcoin, you find that the average attendee there is 18 to 22 years old. So you see a disparity in terms of how this younger workforce sees what is sexy, what is exotic. We are an industry that absolutely has limitless boundaries in terms of how we can recruit from science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So one of the key challenges in what we see are access to talent. Power is another element. There's limits to power. This region in Mexico that we're deploying in is already strapped with power limitations. There's north of 600 megawatts of demand being pulled upon the national utility, and this utility has never built the scale that has been asked to call upon. There's a recent report that just came out that talked about now the national utility for Mexico is investing specifically $300 million into this region, but it's going to take time to bring that infrastructure online, which means while the growth of the cloud continues unabated, there is a limitation and a delta between growth and capacity of power that can build and support that growth.
Because that was going to be my next question, really. Do you see there being a conflict at any time between the growth and the huge potential that you've detailed there and the infrastructure to support it?
Yes, I think there's, in some regions I've read, for example, in Ireland, data centers occupy north of 15% of the entire country's power supply. And I think there's reports that notes that now data centers today occupy nearly 3.25% of the world's power supply. Power supply here is going to be a major topic of discussion. I think as we think about the next 20 years, we would be remiss not to be thinking about derivative sources of energy, more and more dependency on hydroelectric, where possible, green, sustainable wind, solar. But with all things, right, you can't power a 30 megawatt data center efficiently with solar panels. and not everyone is located near hydroelectric dams. So now we're going to have to start thinking about getting into clean energy, nuclear, hydrogen, where we begin using these proven methods of energy source. We put them inside of aircraft carriers, inside of satellites. There's a point where we're going to have to think about whether we bring on micro nuclear reactors that can power cities, towns, municipalities, and eventually data centers. So I think we have no choice. We are a steward of society leading this kind of growth of now data becoming the fourth evolution, the industrial revolution. We have an obligation to our next generation, our children, to leave this place in a better place than we left it. And the reality is that we've got a lot of work to do. I know there's a lot of talk about where we need to be, relative to green, sustainable, carbon neutral. But that only begins with us interacting with government. We have to be more interactive with government. We have to treat government more as a partner than an adversary. And more so, we have to roll our sleeves up and think creatively how collectively we work as an industry, as opposed to a one-off to fight this. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a battle, but more so it's an opportunity for us to be a leader in our own right on proving how we can create a new technology, a new evolution of data centers, and become more efficient at the same time.
So I want to hang on to that word opportunity there, because sometimes adversity leads to opportunity here. We've got things like, the AI technology being energy hungry. We've got the demand for this capacity growing. There's huge potential there, and then if the infrastructure can't support it, then you've got potentially an issue. Do you feel because of those particular challenges, there is an opportunity for people to think differently and come up with some very creative and potentially very sustainable solutions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a tough question to answer, to be fair and honest with you. I think that we all have a responsibility as parents to leave this place better than when it was given to us. I think we have a responsibility to figure out creatively how we bring upon this technology that is coming like a tsunami. It's not going to change. If there's one thing that I can tell you, that if it's one thing we've gotten wrong every time, we've never been able to accurately build the demand of the growth of the cloud and of data. We've never been able to figure it out. Every regression analysis model has been incorrect. We've always gotten it wrong, and we've always underbuilt. I think where we need to be smart is the location of these data centers are going to be both at the hub and at the spoke. Yes, will they be in telephone booths in the West End of London? Absolutely. But they'll also be prospering in the suburbs of Slough. We have to be smart about where we put these data centers. And moreover, we have to be really, really open with educating the public, because the biggest misnomer about this industry is that we don't create jobs. And to a certain degree, there's truth behind that. Primary jobs created at the data center are low because these buildings are almost autonomous. However, that secondary and that tertiary job growth is massive. For example, our project in Guanajuato, Mexico, we envision two 32 megawatt buildings. And while the capital spent on those two buildings will nearly eclipse $800 million, the job creation that we're going to create on the secondary and tertiary ring will bring over $2 billion of economic output to that region, creating over 3,000 jobs on the secondary and tertiary level. I think a challenge that we have is we're going to have to start educating this new generation, getting this new generation to realize that this industry is just as sexy, just as exotic, and quite frankly, it brings with it a high degree of skilled workforce and job security, because these jobs are going to be growing at a pace where right now we can't put enough bodies in those slots of those jobs. So I think we've got a responsibility to the human capital side, and we have a responsibility to ourselves on how we build these data centers.
Well, Michael, for a man who said that was a difficult question, you've absolutely put that one out of the park, and we will leave it there as we are running a little behind time now. So thank you so much for joining us at Data Centre Live London. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Michael, thank you.